The thing that is destroying you right now is probably not real. Not in the way you think it is. Not with the weight and the texture and the suffocating completeness with which your mind has been presenting it to you at 3 in the morning and during every quiet moment and in the background of every conversation, where you were physically present and mentally somewhere else entirely. The situation may be real, the challenge may be genuine, the loss may have actually happened, but the version of it that is living in your mind, the magnified, catastrophized, endlessly rehearsed, worst-case extended, never quite finished version that your imagination has been constructing and reconstructing, that version is not reality. That version is suffering manufactured in excess of the actual event. And it is costing you more than the event itself ever did. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of the most powerful military force in the ancient world, a man who faced genuine plagues and genuine wars and genuine losses of a magnitude that most of us will never be asked to endure, wrote something in his private journal that was not written for you but has survived 2,000 years to reach you at exactly this moment. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But there is another line, a line that cuts even deeper. A line that names the specific mechanism by which most human suffering is not delivered by the world but manufactured by the mind." He wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Your estimate of it, not the thing. Your estimate. The suffering is in the interpretation, and the interpretation is yours to change." Stay with me. Her name was Rachel. 43 years old, a project manager at a technology firm in Seattle. Smart, capable, deeply respected by the people who worked with her. A woman who had built a career through the specific combination of intelligence and discipline and genuine care for the people around her that, when it comes together in a person, makes them quietly indispensable. And for 6 months she had been living inside a fear that was consuming her from the inside out. Her company was going through a restructuring. Leadership had been vague about timelines and outcomes. 2 of her colleagues had already been let go. She had not been told anything definitive. And in the absence of information, her mind had done what minds do in the absence of information. It had filled the space, completely, with the worst possible version of every possible outcome. She lay awake at night constructing the scenario in precise detail. The conversation with HR. The box she would carry out of the office. The explanation to her husband, the children noticing the change in her mood at dinner and not knowing what was wrong, the mortgage, the savings she had, calculated and recalculated to determine exactly how many months they had before the numbers became genuinely frightening. She had lived that scenario hundreds of times. She had felt the humiliation of the HR conversation hundreds of times. She had processed the grief of losing the identity she had built around her work hundreds of times, and none of it had happened. She was at her desk every day, performing her role with the quiet excellence she had always brought to it, while simultaneously living in parallel, in a catastrophic version of a future that existed only in her mind. She was suffering enormously. She was suffering daily, persistently, viscerally, and the source of the suffering was not the restructuring. The source of the suffering was her estimate of it. The restructuring was resolved 6 months later. Her position was not eliminated. It was expanded. The future she had lived in for 6 months in her mind. The future that had cost her sleep and presence and the ability to enjoy a single meal with her family, without the shadow of the imagined catastrophe present at the table, never arrived. She had suffered for 6 months, in her mind, for a future that did not happen. And the most devastating part of this story is not that it happened to Rachel. The most devastating part is that it is happening to you, right now, in some form, in some version of the catastrophe that your mind is currently constructing and presenting as reality. Let me describe the mechanics of this with the precision it deserves. Because this is not about optimism. This is not about thinking positive thoughts and attracting better outcomes. This is about understanding, with philosophical and psychological accuracy, what your mind is actually doing and what it is actually costing you. The human brain is a prediction machine. Its primary function, and the thing it was, evolutionarily optimized to do, it is not to perceive reality accurately. It is to anticipate threats, to model future danger, to run simulations of everything that could go wrong so that you can prepare and respond and survive. This was an extraordinarily useful function in an environment where the threats were physical and immediate, where the rustling in the grass was a predator that would kill you if you did not respond, where the prediction machine that ran the most vivid and alarming threat simulations was the one most likely to still be alive in the morning, but you are not in the grass. You are not being stalked by a predator, and the prediction machine that evolved to protect you from immediate physical danger is now being run continuously, at full capacity, against the completely different landscape of modern life, that against social threats and professional uncertainties and relationship anxieties and financial fears, and it is producing threat simulations of staggering vividness and complexity and emotional reality in response to things that may never materialize. The body does not distinguish between the imagined threat and the real one. The cortisol is real. The elevated heart rate is real. The disrupted sleep is real. The consumed attention, the eroded presence, the diminished capacity for joy, all real, even when the thing causing them exists only in the mind's projection. Marcus Aurelius knew this mechanism, not in the neuroscientific language we now have for it, but with the direct, first-hand clinical precision of a man who had been studying his own mind for decades and had watched it again and again amplify events beyond their actual dimensions. He wrote, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. The future you are afraid of does not yet exist, and the weapons you will have when it arrives, if it arrives, are the same weapons you have right now." The mind's insistence on pre-suffering every possible disaster is not preparation. It is a tax paid in your most valuable resources, attention, energy, presence, peace on for an event that may never arrive to collect it. Marcus Aurelius did not arrive at equanimity easily, and this is the part of his story that gets lost in the translation, from historical figure to inspirational quote. He was emperor of Rome during one of the most genuinely difficult periods of Roman history, the Antonine Plague, one of the most devastating pandemics the ancient world ever experienced, swept through the empire during his reign, killing millions. The northern frontier was in continuous conflict. There were political betrayals. There were the deaths of children. There was the daily grinding, completely unavoidable weight of decisions that cost human lives. He had every reason, more reason than almost any human being in history, to be consumed by the magnitude of what surrounded him. And yet the meditations, his private journal, written for no audience but himself, are not the writings of a man overwhelmed by the scale of his circumstances. They are the writings of a man who has learned, through practice and through the philosophy of stoicism, to locate the source of suffering, not in events but in the mind's interpretation of them. The turning point for Marcus was not a single moment of illumination. It was the accumulated result of a practice, the daily practice of examining his own thoughts, of asking about each fear and each anxiety and each imagined catastrophe. The question that Stoic philosophy places at the center of mental discipline: is this within my control? If the answer was yes, act. Bring your full intelligence and will and energy to bear on the thing you can actually influence. If the answer was no, release. Not with indifference, not with the cold suppression of feeling that misunderstands Stoicism as emotional anesthesia, but with the conscious, deliberate, practiced act of withdrawing your attention from the territory you cannot govern and returning it to the only territory where your attention actually does anything. This is the turning point, not a revelation that arrives from outside, a discipline that is built from inside, one day at a time, one examined thought at a time, one conscious choice to locate the source of suffering in the interpretation rather than the event, and then to change the interpretation. That practice is available to you, right now, with whatever is consuming you. The first lesson: the map is not the territory. Your thought about the thing is not the thing. Marcus wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The map your mind has drawn of the situation you are afraid of is not the situation. It is a rendering, a model, built from incomplete information, filtered through your particular history and your particular anxieties, and the specific ways that previous experiences have taught your prediction machine to expect the worst. Rachel's map of the restructuring was detailed and vivid and emotionally real. It had texture and dialogue and a specific quality of shame that she had experienced in previous professional setbacks, and that her mind had imported wholesale into the current scenario. It was a map. It was not the territory. The territory, when it eventually revealed itself, looked nothing like the map. When you notice the suffering, the anxiety, the dread, the low continuous hum of imagined catastrophe, ask yourself this question: am I suffering from the situation, or am I suffering from my thoughts about the situation? Can I identify specifically where the actual event ends and my interpretation of it begins? This is not a trick to make the fear go away. It is a precision instrument for locating the actual source of the pain. And once you can locate the source accurately, you can address it accurately. You can ask whether the interpretation is serving you, whether it is based on evidence or on the most alarming version of a possible future, whether it is worth the resources you are spending on it. The second lesson: most of what you fear will not happen. And what does happen, you will handle. There is a study referenced repeatedly in the psychology of worry that found that approximately 85% of the things people worry about either never happen or, when they do happen, are handled better than the person expected. 85%. The suffering was real. The events were largely not. And for the 15% that did materialize, people reported that they had handled it, that they had found in the actual encounter with the actual difficulty resources and capacities that the imagined version of the difficulty had not included in its simulation. Marcus captures this with an economy that is almost painful in its precision. He wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. The fear of the thing is often more destructive than the thing itself." The anticipatory suffering, the preemptive grieving, the life spent in the waiting room of a catastrophe that may never call your name. This is the genuine tragedy, not the event. The unlived life that was spent preparing for an event that did not come. You will handle what arrives. You always have. Think of every previous version of the catastrophe you imagined and ask, did I survive it? Even the ones that came true, even the ones that were genuinely, objectively terrible. Did you survive? You are here. You survived, and you will survive what is coming, whatever it is, with the same human resilience that has always been available to you and that your mind, in its worst-case projections, always conveniently omits. The third lesson: the present moment is the only real address. Everything else is a story. Marcus wrote, "Confine yourself to the present," not as a retreat from responsibility, not as a refusal to plan or prepare or act on what the future requires, but as the recognition that the present moment is the only place where life is actually occurring, the only place where action is possible, the only place where you actually exist, rather than in the imagined future or the replayed past where the suffering mind spends most of its time. The anxiety is almost always about the future. The grief is almost always about the past. The present moment, the actual texture of right now, the actual breath you are currently taking, the actual room you are currently in, is almost always manageable, almost always survivable, almost always, when examined directly rather than through the lens of what happened before or might happen next, something that can be met. Rachel realized, in the 6th month of her suffering, that she had not been present at a single dinner with her family in half a year. She had been physically at the table. She had passed the dishes and asked about the school day and smiled at the appropriate moments. But she had been in the future, in the HR conversation, in the box she would carry out, in the catastrophic version of the rest of her life. She had sacrificed 6 months of actual life, actual meals, actual conversations, actual moments with people she loved, to a future that did not come. And when she understood this, the grief was not for the job she had feared losing. It was for the time she had already lost, the real time, the present moments that had passed unused while she was somewhere else. The 4th lesson: change the estimate and you change the suffering. This is the most radical and the most practical of everything. Marcus Aurelius ever wrote about the mind. It is the one that, if you actually apply it, transforms your relationship with everything that currently feels overwhelming. The pain is not due to the thing itself. It is due to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. One that includes the actual evidence rather than just the worst possible reading of the available information. I want to take you back to Marcus Aurelius, not the emperor, the man. He is in his private quarters. It is late. The empire is managed for another day. The dispatches are answered. The decisions are made. The weight of being the most powerful person in the Western world has been carried for another 16 hours. And he picks up his journal. Not to record his victories, not to document his wisdom for posterity. He did not know posterity would ever read this. He wrote these words for himself, as reminders, as the daily, unglamorous, completely private practice of a man who was struggling, genuinely struggling, to maintain the equanimity he believed in the face of everything his life was actually requiring of him. And he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wrote it because he needed to hear it, because the mind he was trying to govern was his own, because the suffering he was trying to locate accurately was his own, because the gap between knowing the philosophy and living the philosophy was, for him as for everyone, a gap that required daily attention and daily work and daily honesty about the distance between where the mind was and where he wanted it to be. He was not serene. He was practicing serenity. Every day. In conditions that would have given any reasonable person every justification for panic and grief and the consuming anxiety of a man carrying more responsibility than any human being should have to carry. And he kept practicing. Because the alternative, to be run by the estimate rather than to examine the estimate, to be at the mercy of the mind's projections rather than in conscious relationship with them, was a kind of suffering he had chosen, deliberately and with full philosophical clarity, not to add to the suffering that was already genuine and unavoidable. You are suffering more in your mind than in reality, not because you are weak, because you are human, because you have a brain that was built to protect you by imagining the worst. And that brain is running at full capacity on a landscape of threats that are largely imaginary. The weapons you will have when the real difficulty arrives are the same weapons you have right now. You do not need to suffer in advance. You do not need to pay the tax before the bill arrives. You do not need to grieve the future before the future has had the chance to reveal itself. You are here, right now, in the only moment that actually exists. And in this moment, this actual present real moment, you are okay. Let that be enough. Here is the practice. The actual daily Aurelius in his journal practice that transforms the relationship between your mind and your suffering. Tonight or tomorrow morning, sit with the thing that is consuming you, the fear, the imagined catastrophe, the worst-case scenario your mind has been rehearsing, and ask it 4 questions, not to dismiss it, to examine it with the honest precision it deserves. First, is this happening right now? Not might it happen, not has it happened before, not could it happen. Is it happening right now, in this moment, in the actual present tense of your current existence? Second, is my interpretation of this situation based on evidence or on the most alarming version of the available information? Third, if the thing I fear actually happens, will I be able to handle it? Not perfectly, not without pain, but will I be able to meet it with the same human resilience that has met every previous difficulty in my life? And fourth, what is the suffering that I am generating in advance of this event actually costing me? What meals, what conversations, what moments with people I love am I absent from because I am somewhere else, in a future that may never arrive? These are not rhetorical questions. They are precision instruments. They are the tools Marcus Aurelius used in his private journal 2,000 years ago to govern the most powerful mind of his era. They are available to you right now, in the life you are actually living, about the thing that is actually consuming you. You do not have to suffer in advance. You have not been issued a requirement to pay the emotional price of every possible future before you know which one is coming. The pain is not due to the thing itself. It is due to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment, including this one. Examine the estimate. Change the estimate. Come back to the present moment where your life is actually occurring, and where the people who love you are actually waiting, and where the work that matters is actually available to be done. You are suffering more in your mind than in reality. You always were. Now you know it. Now you can stop. If this reached the part of you that has been living in a future that has not arrived, share it with the person you know who is paying the tax before the bill comes. Subscribe for more philosophy that meets you inside the actual struggle. And tell me in the comments, what is the imagined catastrophe you have been living in that you are choosing, starting today, to examine rather than inhabit?